What I'd just like to say, we've had your presentation, and then we had one work session. We're here for the second work session, and there's been some discussions spread out amongst all of us. In some ways, it looks like we might be trying to zero in on a lower rate than what we had advertised. Might be a 3 cent, but it's up for discussion. Along with that, I think we'll for sure want to put money in for the cost of the capital project at the high school, and we're also locking in some raises for school personnel, and also looking in for some raises for city employees. But we just want to hear some conversation and some thoughts around the table. So at this point, somebody like to chime in?
Yeah, I mean, I would just echo that. I think that we I definitely appreciate all the time and effort and months that go into the budget preparation for staff. I thought they did an exceptional job, and that for me, the disconnect in the outlay for positions and additional expenditures was what I felt was a disconnect to the work in the comprehensive plan, and that it didn't align in the way that I kind of hoped it might. And so my hope is that, again, coming over the next several months and even in the next year, that we can all work more intentionally, not as if we aren't, but more intentionally about aligning it to that vision and goals and shared objectives that were outlined in the plan. And particularly with the positions, what gave me pause was that it was a large increase in positions, and recurring expenses particularly give me pause. Maybe it's just I've been a public employee for too long, but recurring expenses gives me some unique pause, and that in the timeline that we sort of established for ourselves, I think that it's an inadequate amount of time to really have a thoughtful conversation about the purpose and why behind the positions. Not that there isn't justification, I'm sure Mr. Hank will share with us, but I'm certainly supportive of as the mayor mentioned, making sure that we've, the 2 cents of a 3 cent, potential rate would go to support the balance of the debt service that we've already sort of commissioned, and that we want to achieve with our partners on the school board, and would certainly support compensation. I love the merit-based formula. I really appreciate the thoughtfulness that staff has put into that. I think that will be an exceptional program to reward the best of the best in the city, and I'm really anxious to see that executed, and then also would very much support providing additional resources to the school division to help address the critical salary issues that they have with new recruits, mid-career professionals, and the specialized instructors that they tell us about. So just echo that.
I mean, he covered what I was going to say.
Oh, yeah.
He has a habit of doing
I
that.
do that. We'll change the seats next time.
Mr. Freeman?
No, I think, fortunately, we met today and talked, and when I talked with Mayor Allen and Vice Mayor Short, I told him I felt like when we did, we were in the same book, on the same chapter. It may be our pages a little different, but I appreciate the input. My feeling is that some of the main problems we seem to have, I don't think this plan is going to address specifically those problems. And so that's what I want to do a better job maybe with the increases. I also, so I think we are going to have to do a little better with in the city, and I hope that our colleagues on the school board will see different ways to handle some funds, even though I know they are in the same boat. And I agree with the teacher salaries, no question, to help with those problems. So I too agree with the mayor and vice mayor that we need to do something. I'm not sure that we're addressing specifically the problem we need to address.
I guess I'll just add, just having the opportunity to be on the, the comp plan committee and being or the steering committee and being a part of the comp plan and just really, again, just echoing what you just said, just, really not seeing that, with the added positions. And also, of course, it's definitely an expense that, we had to decide, of course, whether or not to take that on. And, just talking with everybody, colleagues, I just didn't get a yes or a, confirmation that we wanted to go that route and taking on those expenses.
Mr. Marks?
Well, I think since Mr. Hamp's budget presentation, it got me to thinking about the priorities as I see them anyway. Maybe not others would disagree about the priorities, but I know there are things we'd like to do, probably all of which have merit to them, but my thinking was, and I think I conveyed this a little bit to Mr. Hamp, was that I had some reservations about all these positions right now and about the proposed tax increase on real estate. I don't have any real problem with the other proposed taxes, raises, and in light of we had a 7% increase last year, a good chunk of which was designated for the school capital improvements there at the high school. I guess bottom line is, could we continue to provide a reasonable level of core services for the city for less than the 6% we've advertised? And I hadn't arrived at any specific dollar amount, but I'm hearing maybe 3 cents, and I'm comfortable with that if that's with other council members. So I think I don't know what the future holds, and I won't be in that process as a member of council, but I don't know what we'll be looking at next year again. So, but I think to the extent that we can lessen the tax burden on the citizenry, but still provide good services, as I think we have for the in the realm of education and safety and so forth, then I think my thought would be that we should go with a less than 6%.
And one thing that I'd like to add, in doing with the 3-cent tax increase, we know probably next year or the following year, there's going to be another increase requested because we'll start into the second phase of the school renovations. And so this isn't a done deal here, in the last, if we do wind up with 3-cent tax increase, it'll be 10 cents in 2 years with more to come. And that's a certainty. That's not something we're sitting here going, well, maybe. It is. And that second phase is going to be one of the more expensive phases. And so it's going to probably require more of a tax increase unless some things change or some debt comes off. But I think it's our job not only to look and vote for what we have today, but also try to plan ahead for future councils and for future years to come. So with that, Mr. Hamp, I'm sure you have some words you'd like to share with us.
Indeed I do, Mr. Mayor.
And you're on TV, so.
Well, I want to acknowledge, first of all, that I recognize, and I know that the executive staff recognizes, and I would imagine that most employees recognize that there is a difference between recommending a tax rate and voting on a tax rate. And I think I personally, and I imagine most of my colleagues in the organization, respect and appreciate the different role that the council members fulfill in that regard. I wouldn't say that recommending a rate is easy. I think that if you ask any county administrator or city manager who contemplates making such a recommendation to their elected body, they carry a fair amount of stress, and because of that, try to do their level best in working with their staff to make sure that a recommendation of that magnitude is underpinned with solid purpose and solid rationale and legitimate basis. And I would continue, I don't disagree with or take exception to the feedback that the council has provided. I would say that alignment is a pretty important theme, and I and the council should probably begin working on better alignment between a budget recommendation and the expectations of the council members sooner rather than later. I might suggest respectfully that the budget, upon close examination, probably reflects to a greater extent than one might first realize the priorities established by the comp plan, the recently adopted comp plan. I think if you look at public education, public safety, community health as being pretty core to the fundamental recommendations or observations, I think this budget gets at that and continues to support our organization in pursuit of those objectives. I'll acknowledge pretty quickly that it does not, the recommended budget does not sort of have a signature project that everyone can look at and say, that came out of the comp plan, I'm excited, we're headed places, and we're off to the races. I think we are, but I agree. That's probably a flaw in the recommended budget. The positions, I would simply make this observation. In my experience, our staff has been pretty skilled at shaping the organization to meet either the fiscal environment or the service environment or the community need as it's presented. And I realize that our community reflects probably more conservative. I wouldn't go to assign a partisanship to a conservative value, but the Valley folks want the government to be appropriately sized, not excessive, and affordable. And I was doing some checking, anticipating that the positions, sort of reading the tea leaves and anticipating that the positions might be an area of close examination. And it may be helpful for the council to know, and I hope it's informative for the public to know, that in 2010, the fiscal year that ended June 30th, 2010, there were 341 full-time classified positions in the municipal organization across all funds. In the current fiscal year, the one that ends June 30th of 18, there are 319. So over time, I think the organization has been responsive to signals of appropriately sized government. I think that some measure the council deserves credit from some and perhaps blame from others for that reduction. So I just would like to say on behalf of the organization and in defense of my recommendation, I think we're pretty sensitive to the size and shape of our organization, and I certainly would take care in making recommendations for additional positions, but realize that new positions are going to come under immediate and close scrutiny, and I appreciate and understand that. I would say this too, that when a manager, or when in this case Mike Hamp, recommends a 6-cent real estate tax increase paired with increases in the cigarette tax and the meals tax, as you conclude the assemblage of that budget, in my family we play a game called What If? And I think I begin to play in my own mind, and we work as staff to say, what if your recommendation for 6 cents isn't realized? And so I think either formally or informally, we all have ideas about how to position the budget, preserve objectives of public education, public safety, employee compensation, and still arrive at a tax rate that is acceptable and can be endorsed by the city council. So I think we have some general ideas about how to do that, and I might call on Mr. Shaw to share some of our ideas in that regard.
Certainly. Well, bearing in mind that if we're to reduce the budget by the value of 3 cents on the real estate tax rate, that means we need to reduce expenditures by roughly $525,000. And the value of all of the positions, excluding, let's set aside the concrete crew because they're actually would have been paid for from VDOT funds, so that's a net sum zero there. But the positions, the actual impact on the general fund would have been about $300,000 when you consider wages, benefits, and then equipment that those employees need. So that gets you $300,000 of the $525,000 that we need to find. And then beyond that, what I might suggest is that on the city side, the proposal is that the employee increases would begin in October. And so I might suggest that we propose to Dr. Castle that the schools would do likewise. Now, the issue to consider there is simply that next year you have to pick up a full year's worth of both of those raises. And we've done that, and the schools have done that, and we've weathered that. And it's part of the increase that we have to deal with this year is that we gave a partial year raise last year. Now we have to bear the full cost of that. But I don't think that the number is so onerous as to dissuade us from doing that to get ourselves through this budget cycle. So beyond that, I think when we start talking about how to reduce the budget, but again, I would emphasize that in the original city manager's budget, $1 million new were going to the schools. And some of that is fairly well fixed either by formula or by the debt service. So the one area that we have some latitude would be in those the teacher's compensation. But hopefully that will give Dr. Castle something to work with, really something meaningful to work with. Beyond that, I think you start to talk about what are the increases in the current budget that increase either levels of service or programs and that sort of thing, and then talk about level funding. And with the dollar values we're talking about, I think you have to look for things that are fairly significant. So a couple of things that come to mind immediately, and bearing in mind, I'm throwing broad general suggestions to you now, and then we will come back to you with an add-delete list that you have an opportunity then to weigh in on. But a couple of items that are fairly sizable. One would be that we had an increase of $50,000 to the non-VDOT paving program, and that you could save that $50,000 just by level funding non-VDOT paving. Another item is that we had about $50,000 plugged into the budget for purchase services to do engineering specific to the recycling center in anticipation of Sunset Park. We still have $150,000 or so that's for actual work at Sunset Park. That's to bury the gas, methane gas lines up there that are part of the park plan and that DEQ and our insurance company would expect us to do. So we can move forward with that physical work. I would suggest that we start to accelerate our conversation about how we might do complete Sunset Park, and that this money that would have been for engineering around the recycling center would just be rolled into that project. And so we would put that off until you have capital money being devoted to the project. There are a couple of smaller items that I think could help. That we do have a piece of hardware that's about $20,000 that is necessary to install software that the assessor, the real estate tax assessor, uses in the CAMA program. CAMA is the computer-aided massive appraisal system. The council's already appropriated money for software purchases there. There's some additional appropriation this year for maintenance, and then this piece of equipment. And we could purchase that from the IT reserve, just take that out of your fund balance. And then the manager's contingency would be trimmed probably by about $20,000. And so with those cuts, I think we get ourselves pretty close to the number that you're looking for. If I were to make any plea to the council, it might be to allow us a little bit of time. If there were any of the positions, I think that certainly the conversation Mr. Hampton I've had, that we tried to preserve it, maybe that one police officer. And so, but we're going to have to do some additional work to come through the budget. And along those lines, that I think the things that we would hope to be able to preserve this year, you've already mentioned. One is employee compensation and trying to preserve our ability to move forward with a merit-based performance pay increase. And then as well, it's not tremendous dollars, but we had a fair number of increases in employee training this year. And I think we'd like to start to build education and training dollars. I think as we talked about turnover and trying to attract and retain employees, pay was certainly a part of the formula, but I think there are other things in that providing better education and training opportunities to our employees, I think both is good motivation for the right employee, and it benefits the city in the long run by having a better trained, better skilled workforce. I think we'd like to try to preserve those dollars. But that's in a nutshell. I mean, without getting into the process that we go through in balancing the budget anyway, or finding $1,000 here or $500 there, those would be the broad things. And the theme would be essentially that we're scaling back to current levels of service, not expanding levels of service in various areas. And having that communication with the school board and Dr. Castle about how we would foresee being able to provide a meaningful increase to teacher salaries.
And one question. The figure that our budget will increase from last year's budget to this year's budget, if it would end up being a 3-cent tax increase,
Right,
along with the meals and cigarette tax, and the growth that we have or anticipated to be in, do we have that figure of how much the budget actually is increasing?
I'll give you a rough number, and then we can fine tune it. Would be about $1.7 or $8 million.
So a little under $2 million increase.
Sir?
A little under $2 million
Yes, sir.
increase.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
if somebody comes to me and goes, well, y'all not really moving forward or not doing anything, and I understand, and y'all keep reminding me, even though we have more money coming in, a lot of our cost of things that we have continue to go up. So it's not like we got $1.7 million that we didn't have last year that we got free.
Right.
Because a lot of it is eat up as we've got to this point.
Additional regional program cost over $100,000 in
Correct.
that. So
Correct.
it's, well, we either cut existing services $100,000, or we have to provide that someplace. School division, $500,000 in additional expenditures for children with individualized development education
Right.
programs.
Right.
There's no backup, there's no backstop state or federal money coming to support that. So we either
Well, I think you
dig
mentioned
into the pockets here,
It'd
or
be real nice if every time we got
yeah,
a mandate, the cash came with it.
it doesn't come with
Well,
it. So
the council received a presentation from the Department of Social Services just Monday night. Well, the funding for social services goes up $100,000.
Right.
And I sympathize actually with what Ms. Anderson and Mr. Short said about the comp plan. The comp plan was a project, Mr. Gide and I, to a lesser extent, spent a lot of time And I think some of it was a timing issue, and we anticipated that our department heads are putting their budgets together in November and December, and we just adopted the comp plan. So I would echo some of that sentiment, and that I would hope next year we're better aligned. But I would certainly say to any constituent that the increase in your discretionary contribution to the schools is significant, both in paying for high school renovation and trying to do something about teacher compensation and honoring the formula as it exists, that our contribution to the schools just by virtue of formula went up more than $250,000. And I think there are increases in public safety that even absent these positions, that there are significant increases in fire department and police department and material and training. The replacement of the equipment at the fire department is necessary. We have a little choice over it, but it's expensive. It's, again, more than $250,000 to provide breathing apparatus. And it's not fun. It's like any of us who have to replace the roof at our home. We don't get a whole lot more pleasure out of the house because it has a new roof, but we feel a lot safer, and the house, is in better stead. So I would say to your constituents that there are certainly things where you're advancing the community's interest and or simply maintaining the services that we're obligated to provide.
I mean, I did a little back of the napkin math on in the last 2 years for the school system alone. It's about $2 million in additional funding in terms of the debt service for the high school. Delivering a signature project. You mentioned there's not detectable in there. Well, the other 2 cents for the debt service for the high school is a detectable project. It's an objective of the comprehensive plan. So, to me, I think we can point to things that maybe weren't directly derived out of the comprehensive plan, but certainly were complemented in the comprehensive plan that are being achieved through even that. And I would also add that it would be helpful to. It's just like everybody's personal budget. Sometimes at the next year you go, did I increase that last year? We did $64,000 in an increase for police education and training last year. $64,000 increase, even with that 3% reduction. Even if you took all that off there, that $64,000 still carries through the budget. They were asking for another 40 some thousand. But it's still that 64,000 that we appropriated last year. So it's still we're just trying to it's a community of 22,000. You can only do so much at any given time, and so I think that it's an exciting time for Waynesboro, and there's still very good things that are happening in the budget. So
And this is not the end. I mean, it will continue to grow, I think, every year, and the tax base will increase. It has to finish off the high school, and we still have that echo in the back of our mind when we talk about Winona and Berkeley Glen. So it's not like that's the end of it. And I realize that we keep saying, well, maybe some debt service will get paid
That's
up,
right.
but I appreciate everything that the staff has worked on and can appreciate the requests that come forward. And I, by no means do I sit here and say, I'm not paying attention to any of that. I am. And I wish that there was a way we could fund it without, as Mr. Short just said, there's only so much you can squeeze out of the tomato, and I think we're squeezing. So anybody else have anything they'd like to add?
Well, I think as the mayor said, it's probably just not the end of, tax increases, and at least maybe we can apportion that over a period of years and not all at one time. And so that's.
Pay me now or pay me later. It's going to come. So
the new state health insurance rates came out today, and so my premium will go up for my family about $42 next year, and that's just my side. And God bless the state, and they subsidize the rest of it in the same way the city of Waynesboro does. So we can either, you have to support the staff that you have, so you take whatever rate that increase, multiply it by 319 employees, that stuff starts to add up. And so I think we just need to be mindful of all of the additional costs that are forced upon us by outside sources, and be thoughtful about expenditures as we move forward. But again, I very much appreciate all the hard work that everyone on staff has put into it, and hope that they also see that we're still advancing in a positive direction. It's just maybe a little more incrementally.
Agreed.
I know when I look at these pages of numbers and columns, it amazes me how much time and effort went into making that all on a sheet of paper. I mean, and so I echo what others have said here, that we're very lucky to have the staff we have, and no question about the fact that they work hard on it, and they're dedicated, and they present what they feel is in their minds is good proposals, and as I say, they have merit, but the question comes is how much of it can you afford?
I reckon at our next meeting, we'll come back with the finalization of what we have, what we don't have, and we still have to have a public comment.
That's correct.
And so it's still more discussion to be in, but it's kind of the facts are what they are. And but it's still more room for us to have more conversations. Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right. If that's it, then we'll close this meeting. Thank everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.